Dragon Ball may be better if there actually is no canon. I mean, outside the original manga of the Dragon Ball Z portion of things, as far as everything else, we would start to pretty much believe that there is multiple continuities going on. Whereas, like before, you had the movies and you had Dragon Ball GT, was the official continuation for Dragon Ball Z anime, and then we got Dragon Ball Super years later. Now we currently have Dragon Ball Daima, where all three of these mainline stories differentiate with each other. Now, the world of Dragon Ball will probably just be better if we start to accept that all these are different continuities and there's no connection. Where now, if we have that going on, it's just like I would have to compare it to like when we look at things like Marvel and DC comics, how they make multiple stories, do a bunch of reboots, and we get like many different versions of Superman story, Batman, Spider-Man, all these big top characters who have many different stories which are divided by different type of universe and timelines, like the Golden Age, Silver Age, all these different comics that came out. Now, if Dragon Ball was to start doing this the same way, where now we have something like the Dragon Ball Daima timeline, we have the Dragon Ball GT timeline, and we have the Dragon Ball Super timeline, and then of course there's the main timeline, which is the original work, which is the Dragon Ball Z Dragon Ball timeline, which a lot of these stuff are being pretty much created from these original work. Now, if we start getting things like that, where we get things like Dragon Ball Heroes, it was kind of start putting everything in the same boat as Heroes, or putting everything in the same boat as Dragon Ball GT. Because for years, Dragon Ball GT was looked at the official continuation. Now, Heroes was looked at as something for the video games and non-canon to what was the mainline story, the same way how we used to view movies. But when Super came out, someone got the idea to start making Super feel like it was the mainline story of everything. But the funny thing was, Super was never actually ever really the mainline thing. Even as you look at something like Dragon Ball Sparking Zero, they're not calling it Dragon Ball Super Sparking Zero. They're just calling it Dragon Ball. Whereas in before, everything was Dragon Ball Z, Budokai Tenkaichi, or the Sparking series. So things are a little bit different when you're looking at like the marketing. They don't really market as Super as just the mainline overall Dragon Ball franchise, where back then it was Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z. Everything had Dragon Ball Z on the title, down to the video games. None of these games or anything are being promoted as Dragon Ball Super, and for good reason, because Super is just another continuity that's kind of just going on. So once we start to get all this in acceptance, there'll be certain debates that doesn't make any sense, where people are contradicting themselves in debates about what's canon, what's non-canon. And before, the bar was always set by what Akira Toriyama worked on, which in the sense Toriyama worked on all of these different projects, which would make all of these things canon to a certain point, or just non-canon to anything. So it's really hard to say what's canon, what's not canon, and we see a lot of plot holes and things that contradict themselves within, even in Dragon Ball Z, Dragon Ball Daima, Super, and Dragon Ball GT. So ultimately, it'll be pointless to pretty much go by those type of standards. But once we start getting a point where we can start making new stories, where if things come out in the future, we'll be like, okay, this is the Dragon Ball Daima's timeline of things, and we get movies, it'll be Dragon Ball Daima's movie, or just like Super will be Super movies. And if they decide to go back to something like Dragon Ball GT, then we can start getting things of being like a Dragon Ball GT movie, or stories from the Dragon Ball GT timeline, which will make things a lot more better creating stories. Because now, instead of us having one author, like someone like, you have Toyotaro who's working on the Super manga, but now we could probably go get someone else, like let's get Nakasuru to go get his own series and push forward with the Dragon Ball GT timeline or Daima timeline, where saw things he worked on for Super Saiyan 4, and who will have the best vision for his creation, where we'll have someone like Toyotaro who will be in charge of the Super with, the Super Saiyan God transformations and the UI and UE transformations and things to that nature, it'll make things a lot more better and simple. And then we have the overall people who worked on Heroes, or we create something else that's outside of Heroes and have a new continuity that's created of a story that may not have to be directly connected to Goku and Vegeta and those others. We'll probably have something that goes on to the future where we get something that follows like a Goku Jr. from Dragon Ball GT, or something that happened within that 100-year time frame that was at the end of Dragon Ball GT would be a good starting point, or things that just follows the online base where, you know, we have new characters like Beat and these people that's like following the Dragon Ball universe and creating something brand new. So, you know, all these are different concepts that can be created, but ultimately, once we start to get rid of this canon type of thing, things will start making a lot more sense, in a sense, and be a lot better for the Dragon Ball. Ultimately, I feel that it will be able to create new stories without complications and too much confusion. I mean, it's going to always be confusion once you start making all these different branches and things happening different. But once they start fully pointing out, like, okay, Daima is something different, or Super is something totally different, and GT is something totally different, then it'll start making somewhat sense to the fandom that do care about trying to make things canon and debate about it. So that's it for this video. Don't forget to drop a like, subscribe to the channel, and we got more videos coming soon.